right off the
Welcome.
bat. Yes, I was just going to say that the meeting is being recorded. And what I have to do, get rid of that, got it. Okay. Bill Matson is going to be our moderator today. He's quite familiar with this, and so you won't have to endure my fumbling around on the keypad. But I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. As I just noted, the meeting is being recorded, and we would expect everybody to mute themselves, so to just eliminate any unwanted background noise once we get going here. And I think it's nice to have the picture on. The questions, we're going to let, between Morris and Bill, handle them directly, probably after Morris's presentation, but they can talk about that when the time comes. So with that, I'd like to start the meeting with by introducing Duncan Wood, who's going to give us our words of inspiration. Duncan?
In each of our lives, there are moments or situations that make us angry. At other times, there are moments or situations that cause us to fear some future event, a current condition. 50 plus years ago, when I was an undergraduate, I came across a quotation by the author James Thurber. It has remained in my consciousness ever since, and I want to share this simple thought with you. The quotation is as follows: "Let us not look back in anger, nor forward in fear, but around in awareness." I believe the message that Thurber was offering is that if we focus on our anger, we may end up doing foolish things that will have no benefit for us or others, and quite possibly worsen a situation. And if we allow fear to dominate our thoughts, we may be frozen in our actions and fail to take positive steps forward on whatever endeavor we are working on and which we need to be responsive to. But if we fully focus on awareness of the current situation with all of its challenges and possible outcomes, we will make better decisions in our life that hopefully will benefit us, our family, and our community. I have tried in my life to follow this focus on being aware of what is happening in the world around me, both near and far. And I suggest that all of you do the same. So I ask of you to not look back in anger, nor forward in fear, but focus on being fully aware.
Oh, very good, Duncan. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well said. Very good. Okay, so this is our actually our 14th Zoom meeting. Our first one was August of 2020. And since then, we've had, as you recall, 3 in-person meetings. We did have at our November meeting over 60 in attendance. We had our September was our first meeting. October was canceled due to death in the Forbes family. Audrey's mother passed away. Then November, we had our Veterans Day meeting, which was outstanding. And in December, yes, we actually had our Christmas party gathering. And I did say in a couple emails out, it was just outstanding. It's a tough time, and we all know that. And when we decided to go forward with it, we had to do it like 2 weeks in advance of the get together. And of course, as we all know, right in the middle of when the COVID was just spiking out off the scale. And so we were trying to balance letting some folks that had signed up, giving the opportunity to withdraw, and working with Forbes Tavern to keep the number of people that were there, to keep it worthwhile for them, and to also, and very importantly, have certain protocols put in place. And these protocols did get some pushback, but I think it was really minimal. Required us to wear a mask inside, which is completely reasonable. That was Forbes Tavern thing when we weren't eating or drinking. And we instituted also that you had to show proof of vaccination and boost. And trust me, it's not because we didn't trust everyone here. It's just, the trust but verify old saying. And I think ongoing and in the future, that if we do, of course, we don't know where we're going to be, even the next meeting, and I'll get to that a little later. But right now, I would be planning, if we do meet in person earlier, that again, we would expect people to show the proof of their boosters. Obviously, not those who have already done so. For the, you only have to do that once, and people who did it for the Christmas party wouldn't be expected to do it again. And again, it's not just for those of us that are there, but it's also for our significant others and for everyone else. So if people feel it's a little over the top, so be it. I mean, it's one of the things I think we, as a group, are going to be doing to moving forward. Again, it depends on where we are and of course, how this all pans out. But again, I wanted to thank everybody for going along with that for the Christmas party. And as a result, we did wind up with, I think the number was about 56 people in attendance. And for those that were able to make it, we had an outstanding party and gathering. And the entertainment was just wonderful, which Art Rosen was able to get through the humanities console. He might be good for a repeat, actually. He was that good. But anyway, it was a good time by all. So, and as I thanked everybody before, again, thank you all for those that participated. There was a lot of behind the scenes that went into that effort. And I think all in all, it went off very well. So again, thank you. So at this time, I would like to introduce a guest. He's already spoken somewhat, but Peter Kean I met through the Lake Sunapee Wine Tasting Association. And he is, like he said, thank you for taking the risky proposition of vouching for me to the outstanding members of the Squires. By way of his background, he is an attorney, retired after 47 years. His practice was in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire. He has and does serve on a number of boards and committees. The most significant has been as a member of the board of directors of a mass savings bank for many years and is chairman. Most importantly, he is married to Nancy. They live in Newbury and have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. He enjoys boating, snow skiing, snowshoeing, hiking, and dabbling. He means literally in oil painting. Pre-COVID, he enjoyed traveling and will again. His greatest joy is traveling to see his children and grandchildren. Julie in Seattle, Washington, Peter in Los Alamos in California, and Aaron in Whitefish, Montana. Most of that travel has been via Zoom, but he will be with them through Christmas and New Year's. So Peter, welcome. And would you like to say hello to the group?
I would. First, Joe, thank you so much for inviting me to join. For years, there's been for years that friends have suggested that I look into the country squires, and I didn't only because you meet during the week. We've had our house here on the lake for 35 years, but it's only last June that we sold our house in Massachusetts and moved to Newbury permanently. So now we have the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to meeting the many members that you have that I don't know, and I look forward to the camaraderie of the group and the learning that you all enjoy with every meeting. So thank you again for the opportunity to be part of your group.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Now, the first step, by the way, I don't know if I told you, as a guest. The next one will be, if you're so interested, we'll get some paperwork out to you. And then there's a pretty difficult vetting process that one has to go through.
Okay.
You just say, okay, and then you'll be an official member. But thank you, and welcome to our group.
Thank you so much.
I want to make a comment. Well, last February in 2021, our membership stood at 121. As you know, we've had some tough times, losing some really great members. And some are no longer able to attend. Some have moved. And yet the latest number I had was that we were at 131. And there are some people who have not yet paid, so we will have to get that number solidified. But I would again ask, if you have not paid your dues, it's important, not only so we know where we stand membership wise, but you'll be hearing about this too. We've decided that there's going to be a second significant other get together, which will be on our anniversary in May. And I think following the pattern of Christmas time, that we would at least offer a ticket for everybody to get a beverage of your choice on the Squires. So some of the money will be fed back to you in some form of recreation or hospitality in the future. I guess with that, I'd like to, Bill Helm, are you here?
I'm here.
Bill Helm is going to do the honors of introducing our speaker, so I'll turn this over to you, Bill.
Hey, Joe, it's Barry Bradford. Before he does that, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that Don Wright had a stroke the other day. He is back home from Dartmouth Hitchcock. He's doing pretty well, but I thought the membership might want to know that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Oh, boy. Now that's, you know, it's tough. I mean, Don, as you may recall, is the one who was our speaker in November, who gave a great talk on Veterans Day. And for those of you, you know, he was a U-2 pilot. He had, I don't know, 30 some years as piloting aircraft, and just a really great guy. So I'm glad you told me that. I'll follow up. Thanks a lot. And, I wish him well. We all do. Okay, thanks for bringing that up. Bill, you're on, I guess.
Okay, well, our speaker today needs absolutely no introduction, really. Morris Edwards is a former president of our elite group here, current co-chair of the program committee. So the only thing you might wonder with that accent that Morris has, where did he come from? And so just for everybody's benefit, Morris actually grew up in Northern England, where he tells us that he was a cricket and soccer star at one point, but he decided instead to go on into business, got his education in England, then came over here to the States, where he's had a very successful career in business publishing. So without further ado, Morris, we're looking forward to hearing about artificial intelligence, friend or foe. Take it away.
Thanks, Bill. Trying to perform some magic here. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks for joining us today to listen to what I have to say about a subject, a technology that some of you may be familiar with, artificial intelligence. It's been publicized quite a bit, and I'm going to pose a question today. Will it be a friend or foe to society? And its benefits are becoming clear, and they're widely promoted. But there's a downside. And whether AI becomes a friend or foe may well depend on how or if it is regulated and by whom. Much of the threat comes from another technology, big data, which you may not know about. Big data refers to the huge amounts of data that are created by social media, credit card transactions, and the like, every minute of every day. And you need to know that AI operates by finding patterns in that data and making predictions based on the patterns. So AI needs big data, and the more data, the better. So AI, big data is critical to AI, but it's also a threat because that data reveals a great deal about ourselves. Where we go, what we buy, what we read, what we watch, which websites we visit, who we associate with. So if this information is collected by a powerful computer and analyzed by AI, then this personal information could well be a threat for our society, for our privacy. So there are threats as well as benefits from AI, and I'll be discussing them during the course of this presentation. I plan to start, it should take about 20, 30 minutes. I plan to start by talking about the promise and the perils of AI. And then to make sure we're all on the same page, I'll define artificial intelligence and its various elements and talk about its checkered history. Next, I'll discuss how we are already using AI, maybe without knowing it, in our daily lives, and look at its potential use in different fields. After that, I'll review the societal issues raised by AI, and finally, the strategic implications of artificial intelligence, both for the US and for our allies, and also our potential enemies. After that, I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you may have, recognizing that I'm not an expert in AI, I'm just an interested observer. So that's the plan for today. I'm going to start then by looking at the promise and threat of AI with some quotes from some notable people. Starting with the CEO of Google, who says that artificial intelligence is the most transformative technology of our lifetimes, maybe in all of human history. The Microsoft president agrees. He says AI is the most important thing humanity has ever worked on, more profound than electricity or fire. Now, these people have a vested interest. So you imagine that they promote the promise of AI. But they do put their money where their mouth is, because these companies are spending fortunes on becoming leaders in artificial intelligence. And not only that, but they're snapping up companies that show promise in the field and the experts who are working on that. So there's a danger too, because these high-tech companies, a few of them, may grab all the technology and all the talent in AI. And where does that leave the rest of our industry? So that's a particular issue. Now, there's another threat that one of the greatest brains that we've ever known, Stephen Hawking, said that the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Now, he's basing that on the fact that machine intelligence is growing faster than human intelligence. So it makes sense that sooner or later, machine intelligence will overcome human intelligence, machines will take over, and then we're slaves to the machines. That seems a bit far-fetched, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. But another prominent individual, Elon Musk, agrees with him. And in fact, you may know that he's planning to use Mars, to colonize Mars, as plan B in case this happens to planet Earth. So good luck to Elon on that one. Now, in addition to that, there are some other threats. And one of them is job loss. Whenever you talk about automation, you always think about job loss. But usually it's with blue-collar workers. With artificial intelligence, the automation will not only affect blue-collar workers, but also white-collar workers. And last year, and maybe the year before, this AI expert, Kai-Fu Lee, went on 60 Minutes and said that AI-based automation will replace 40% of blue and white-collar workers within 15 years. That caused a whole ruckus. A lot of people believe that it will create jobs, in fact, create more jobs than will be displaced. But nonetheless, job loss is a serious, or job dislocation is a serious issue with it. Another one concerns the privacy, all this data being collected about us. And I think one of the interesting quotes of that comes from the author of a book on surveillance capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff, who said that we thought we were using social media, but it was using us. So that's the situation. So welcome to the world of AI and big data. And to make sure we're all on the same page, I'd like to define what it is. Well, as the name implies, artificial intelligence tries to mimic human intelligence by using a powerful computer algorithm, which is a set of processes and programs, combined with the vast processing power that we have with today's computers, to find patterns within data and to make predictions based on those patterns. And there are various elements that go into artificial intelligence, and you see them displayed there. I'm going to start at 4 o'clock with natural language processing, which is used in various services, but essentially it allows machines to understand speech or text and respond in speech or text. And it's used in translation services, for instance, speech to text dictation software, and digital assistants such as Alexa, Siri, and Google Assistant, which you may be using already. Next, cognitive computing. This uses that natural language processing, along with data mining and pattern recognition, to mimic human thought in analyzing complex situations so that you arrive at better informed decisions. And people in Wall Street use this in their investments. Oncologists in particular use this to weigh the various treatment options for their patients. Computer vision, you probably know about this. This technology trains computers to identify, process, or interpret visual images. And this is what is used in face recognition, as well as interpreting X-rays and MRIs and the like. Next, computer vision, machine learning. Machine learning is intriguing because it allows applications to learn from the data with increasing complexity over time without being programmed to do so. It learns itself, it trains by itself. And this is being used for spam filtering, as well as fraud detection, medical diagnosis, and predictive maintenance. Neural networks. Neural networks take the name from the neurons in the brain, which are used to transmit information between various areas of the brain and between the brain and the nervous system. And this is being used in business analytics and sales forecasting, risk assessment. And it started off at one level of mimicking the brain. But then over time, we've developed several layers, and each layer adds additional complexity. And so now with these multi-layer neural networks, we have something called deep learning. Deep learning takes the benefits of these multi-level neural networks and augments machine learning with it so that it can progressively extract more and more meaning from the data. And this is used to detect the money laundering and the robots that learn from observing and self-driving cars. So these are the various elements that go into artificial intelligence. And what is the history of artificial intelligence? Well, it's one of repeated failures. It starts off with enthusiasm, then you have frustration, and eventually defunding. So this started in the 1950s, and with the initial thought that we have the means through artificial intelligence to mimic human behavior. Of course, that was reaching too far and didn't happen. And by the 1970s, people were frustrated that we were making progress, and then it was defunded. It may have been the victim of unrealistic expectations. Could we really believe that we could replicate human behavior using computers? It was a stretch, because thinking machines, they can do a lot, but they don't have the common sense that we associate with people. And they have difficulty doing things which to us come natural. Nonetheless, there is promise with it. But as I say, the initial thrust of it in the 1950s died out about the 1980s. And then came a bit of a revival, and mainly through computer games. In 1997, IBM developed this supercomputer called IBM Deep Blue, and it played chess against then champion Garry Kasparov, who had an IQ of 190. And yet Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov. So that was quite amazing. Then in 2010, IBM came up with another supercomputer, the Watson. And this took on Ken Jennings, who you may remember was a champion of champions for Jeopardy. And it beat Ken Jennings at Jeopardy. So now people thought, there's something to this artificial intelligence. And yet when you start to think about it, these victories by Deep Blue and Watson were with a supercomputer that was custom built for a Q&A game using natural processing language, but it required 85,000 watts of energy to run. And what does the brain run on? 20 watts. So it's still a long way from mimicking the brain. Nonetheless, a Sputnik moment occurred in 2017 in South Korea, when a supercomputer called AlphaGo was pitted against the world champion of Go, the complex game, Lee Sedol. He'd been the champion year after year after year. And AlphaGo challenged him to play Go. Now, this is more than Jeopardy. This is more than chess. This requires a complex game. It requires intuition. It requires creative and strategic thinking. And people thought that there's no way that a supercomputer, could beat this idol, Lee Sedol, who'd beaten everything in the field. And yet, in 2017, it beat him. And 2 years later, Lee retired and said, this system is just unbeatable. And so there was a revival of interest, especially because 10 million people watched it in South Korea. Many of them in China, where Go is a very popular game. And so that brought artificial intelligence into the realm of the Chinese thinking, as well as thinking around the world, that maybe there is something to this artificial intelligence after all. This time, will AI experience another winter? You know, one of the dangerous phrases in business is, this time is different. People are saying, yeah, it happened in the 70s and 80s, but this time it's different. And one of the reasons it's different is because we're already using artificial intelligence in our daily lives without necessarily knowing about it. So this victory did in fact suggest that artificial intelligence had entered a new dimension. It's becoming quite as common as electricity. And in fact, one of the pioneers in AI, Andrew Ng, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, said that AI is the new electricity and will transform every industry and create huge economic value. His research showed that machine learning was the dominant technique in patents, for instance, that deep learning was the fastest growing technique, that computer vision was the most popular, and there was significant growth in two areas, healthcare and transportation. Now, in healthcare, AI is being used to analyze X-rays, to speed diagnoses, and to discover new antibiotics. And in medicine, it truly does have potential for being revolutionary. And I was just mentioning that maybe, Bill, maybe we can in the future have a speaker who knows about what's going on with AI in healthcare, because it truly is revolutionary, especially for seniors. So I think that would be an interesting topic. In Britain, for instance, the National Health Service have just introduced a tool called DERM, which is very effective in diagnosing cancer, various kinds of cancer in its earliest stages. And that's very important because the earlier you diagnose cancer, the better the chance of curing it. So this tool is now being used throughout the National Health Service. And it's taking a tremendous amount of workload off the doctors, which is important because the National Health Service is plagued by backlogs. And so this tool is starting to ease that backlog. But it's also helpful to the patients, of course, because they're getting early diagnosis of their cancers and the likelihood that it'll be treated quite quickly. Less successful has been artificial intelligence in transportation. We all know about the predictions of autonomous vehicles, that we're going to have self-driving cars on our streets, initially projected by 2020. It didn't happen. But nonetheless, there is progress being made in this field. And in California, there's a truck, a self-driving truck that goes from California to Arizona every day, carrying a full workload. And it does so at half the cost of a driver, plus it operates 24 hours a day. China is making an investment in this field. And in China, some of the people there believe that it's easier to adjust the roads for the autonomous vehicles than it is to adjust the autonomous vehicles for the roads. So they're building roads specifically designed to handle autonomous vehicles. And there's a group in Shenzhen who are going to introduce taxis, self-driving taxis in the near future. So there is work going on in transportation. Plus, we're already using AI and such things as autonomous parking and cruise control. So car makers are starting to use AI, but in subsets of the car. And it may be some time before we actually reach autonomous vehicles. I think Tesla, in its first few years of experimenting, experienced 11 crashes with 17 injuries and 1 death, and had difficulty identifying parked vehicles, parked emergency vehicles and police cars. So there's still a long way to go with fully autonomous vehicles, but nonetheless, progress is being made, and ultimately, I think we'll see self-driving cars and trucks in some form or another. Overall, Price Waterhouse looked at AI and said that it will add $16 trillion to the global GDP by 2030. That's quite a lot of money. And anticipating its growth, people are starting to get concerned about some of the issues, starting with the job loss. Already with COVID, we've seen the job dislocation created by the pandemic. And climate change, that also is likely to affect the job market. If we meet the goal of being carbon neutral by 2030, then there are going to be a lot of jobs lost in the fossil fuel industry. So that, on top of the job loss with AI, could cause severe job dislocation. And the question is, do we have the education and training to keep pace with this rapid change? Because if not, there could be complete chaos in the job market. We've already talked about the concentration of wealth. When you substitute labor with capital, the winner is the capitalist. And already we're at the greatest inequality of wealth that the nation has experienced, with the top 1% being as wealthy as the bottom 50%. And the question is, how much income inequality can society tolerate? Remember the Wall Street movement a few years ago? We were complaining about inequality. Well, with AI, the concentration of power, of wealth, is going to be even greater. And the question will be, how much inequality will society tolerate? So that's one potential peril with AI. The other is this business of the tech titans gobbling up the startups and the talent. Should that be allowed to go through? And if not, who's going to regulate that? And do the people have the knowledge to regulate that? It's a question that remains to be answered. You see, when Zuckerberg goes to Washington, the questions that the congressman asks, it shows that they don't have a clue what's going on. And yet somebody maybe will have to regulate and decide on anti-monopolistic practices by these tech titans if they also take control of this massive area of AI. There's also the issue of privacy and security. You know, with computer intelligence, you have facial recognition, and it's easy to conceive of a society where you have cameras in every street and you use artificial intelligence to see what people are doing and to control the population. Moving into an autocracy, there's that issue. But there's also the issue of privacy. In the healthcare field, we have HIPAA, but in the general field of privacy, we don't have anything in this country to protect individuals from AI. In Europe, they do. They have this organization, the General Data Protection Regulation, which imposes large fees on anyone breaking the privacy rules. Maybe that will be a model for this country. In fact, the EU wants to go even further, and it wants to set limits on the uses of AI, including banning facial recognition. So in Europe, they are concerned about AI and privacy. It doesn't seem to have reached the same level in this country, but it could quite well do so. And then the issue becomes how to regulate, but not to over-regulate to stifle innovation. And again, Andrew Ning has some thoughts on this, and he says that governments should be thoughtful about protecting citizens while creating room for innovations. In other words, you can't stifle innovation in your effort to deal with the perils of AI. You have to somehow strike a balance. And the question is, who is capable of striking that balance? And that's the question going forward. Now, let's take a look at the strategic implications of AI. And the question is, we've seen the potential impact of AI on business. How about on the military? And Britain has taken a look at this and has concluded that technology is going to be the most fundamental metric of national power over the next decade, and is investing £10 million in research, £10 billion on research in AI. And that's a large amount of money, and it hopes to be a leader in AI going forward. Then the question of military use. And Vladimir Putin has already weighed in on this by saying, whoever becomes the leader of AI will be the ruler of the world. Clearly, AI is helpful in training and surveillance, in logistics and cybersecurity, but one of the most dangerous areas is autonomous weapons. Imagine a drone equipped with artificial intelligence looking for battlefield targets, recognizing the target, and then firing a missile. Will there be any human involvement in that, or will we let the drone decide for itself when to fire? The US has already said that there should be human involvement, but other countries have not agreed to that, and it remains an open issue. And work is going on. Israel has already developed an AI system to use with its tanks, patrolling the battlefield to identify potential targets, some of them unseen by human beings. And this country has a warship that unmanned, uncrewed, that goes out and stay out and could potentially launch the vehicles that launch missiles from it. So work is going on in this area, and the question remains to be seen, who will be the ruler of the world? China has made clear its intention in this area. It's said that President Xi Jinping said China will catch up with the US in AI by 2025 and be the world leader by 2030. Xi says that democracy can't compete with an autocracy like itself, because it just takes too long to get consensus. And Xi Jinping has declared that data is the oil of the 21st century, fueling the AI algorithms, and that he intends to make the Chinese Communist Party the world's most powerful data broker. He does this by walling off China from the rest of the world, the Chinese data from the rest of the world, and at the same time absorbing data from other countries, either with illicit or illicit means, to become the most powerful data broker in the world. And you may recall that President Trump issued this moratorium on TikTok, the Chinese application, from taking US data and feeding it back to China. Other countries aren't quite as concerned. And so China is gradually building up this huge database, which it believes will make it the most powerful entity in AI. So who will become the leader in AI and who will set the standards? Well, if this is a run-up to the Super Bowl, clearly some will be contenders, some will be in the playoffs, like Britain and Russia, the EU and Israel. But there's no doubt that the Super Bowl will be played out between China and the US. And it's clear that China has both the means and the ambition to become the world leader in AI. It has so much more data than the US. It can force cooperation between universities, many of which are top-notch now in the technology field. It can force cooperation between the universities and the public and private sectors without restraints or regulations on privacy, face recognition, whatever. And it has a pioneering tech industry. Against that, we have the US, which realizes the need to have a competitive edge in AI for national security. And the US can draw on DARPA, the Defense and Advanced Research Projects Agency, which created the internet, the National Science Foundation, top universities, the culture and expertise in Silicon Valley, and more than 2,000 firms already in AI. But more importantly, a history of market-based innovation with an established group of resourceful entrepreneurs and a huge source of venture capital. So who will become the leader? Will it be China or US? Can a liberal democracy like the US compete with an authoritarian technocracy built on a centrally planned economy, but allocating market resources with AI optimized efficiency? I said the automakers are going to put their bet on China. But as one famous man said, never bet against the United States. So that's my talk. And I hope you've found it interesting and that you have some questions to ask of me.
Yeah, I might suggest if you have questions, the best place to indicate that is in chat down at the bottom of the screen. That'll just let us know that you have a question you'd like to ask. You don't have to ask it in chat, and we can go ahead then and acknowledge you and keep some order in terms of people asking what they'd like to know. Again, down at the bottom of your screen. Donald, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
I'd just like to ask a question about the medical application of AI as a physician. And my understanding is that AI is still unable to use the data from a history, physical examination, and laboratory tests and come up with a diagnosis more precise or more inclusive than humans. I haven't looked at this in a while, but I haven't seen anything in the medical literature to indicate that that's a possibility. If anybody knows about that or can refer me to someone, I would love to make that that connection.
Yeah. Well, It has been, yeah. The thing is that AI won't replace doctors. But it is true that it can diagnose to a far higher degree than human individuals if it has the data. And for instance, the systems have been fed a lot of x-rays. And it's said that AI systems are better than most radiographers in identifying situations with nuances. So in other words, the AI is able to dig deeper and to get more information from an x-ray than the radiographer would. But that doesn't mean to say it's going to replace them. It's just going to use them as a tool. So it's going to make doctors and other medical specialists more efficient in what they do. But AI has reportedly been able to diagnose Alzheimer's early just from blood tests. So there are a lot of developments going on day by day, making new progress. But the capabilities for helping doctors and other healthcare specialists, it's just remarkable. And that's why I say, I think it would be interesting to have someone who does know what's going on in the field to talk about everything that is being done, because it's truly remarkable and a game changer in healthcare.
Yeah, that would be great. You're talking about visual recognition of things like an X-ray. That's different than taking a person's physical signs on exam, their symptoms and so forth and so on, and putting that together and coming up with a diagnosis. And there is no blood test for Alzheimer's disease. So,
no,
Michael,
Can I add something here? So my background a little bit, I retired as VP of Sales and Marketing for the Clinical Medical Division of Fujifilm, responsible for the Western Hemisphere. And before I retired, there are a number of institutions, Mayo in particular, in the US, although in Japan, they're way ahead of us in this area, that are using very sophisticated algorithms, technically AI, if you will, to utilize various components of blood tests to make very, very accurate determinations of liver cancer in an at-risk patient population. If you go to Mayo Clinic's website, you'll see something called, you could Google GALAD, G-A-L-A-D, and that is an algorithm that utilizes gender, age, AFPL3, DCP, there's another one, and it puts it all together and basically eliminates the need for a biopsy in an at-risk population. And that's really, you're starting to see more and more algorithmic data with being funneled together to come up with potential diagnoses, again, in an at-risk population, not in the general population. But the movement is lightning, and actually the American Society for the Study of Liver Disease, AASLD, American Association for the Study of Liver Disease, will probably this year put that on their recommendations for the rest of the country based on studies that are being done at UCSF and Ochsner Medical in New Orleans, as well as some other places. So it is moving forward, and I think there are pockets, like I said, Japan, light years ahead of us in that particular space, not overall in general medical AI, but it is coming. And to your point, it won't replace doctors by any stretch of the imagination, but it will give them additional abilities to utilize information that's already there in a more productive manner, if you will. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm not afraid of being replaced. I'm just looking for help. And what I understand is that the current status of things, the algorithms and the machines can't come up with anything more than what most thoughtful doctors would come up with anyway. Maybe that's changed. I haven't looked at this in a while.
Yeah. No, it's a
Well,
tool.
in the particular instance I referred to with GALAD, in Japan, they take an at-risk population and they screen them with GALAD every 6 months. And they find, using this algorithm, and Philip Johnson of the UK, I want to say University of Birmingham is the one who really developed the algorithm, Dr. Philip Johnson. Their average find of a liver tumor is less than 2 centimeters. And in the United States, the average find of liver cancer in the at-risk population is greater than 4 centimeters. And the outcome is radically different. And again, I'm speaking kind of going back a few years from when I retired, but when I retired, the average life expectancy of 5 year, a 5-year life expectancy in Japan was north of 70% post-diagnosis, where the average life expectancy in the US is 12 to 15%. Again, this is going back 4 years, 3 or 4 years, but that's the difference in using an algorithmic capability for these particular biomarkers put together with age and sex. So it's coming. There's another one called BALAD, which includes albumin and something else, and I can't remember, but they're there. And I think you're going to be seeing more of it, that it's going to enable you to say, okay, you're at risk because whatever the risk factors are, you have cirrhosis, you have NASH, you have, fatty liver disease, whatever. So we're going to screen you. We're going to take these biomarkers, put it together, and it's going to say, you've got a 90% chance right now that one of those nodules in your liver that are cirrhotic is actually cancer. So
Morris, this kind of confirms your thought that there's a lot of interest in this subject, and perhaps a follow-on on the medical aspects of it is in order.
I think so, because the results are truly spectacular. I did read about another development with Alzheimer's, that AI was able to predict with high credibility the potential onset of Alzheimer's with a short speech test. So by analyzing a person's speech, this system was able to predict with some accuracy the potential for onset of Alzheimer's. So there's a lot of interesting work going on that would affect seniors. And I think it would be good to have someone who knows what's going on to talk about these developments, which are really mind-boggling.
Right.
Do we know any seniors?
Peter Rucci. Peter Rucci had a question.
I was curious, Morris, if you have any feel from your readings at how much U.S. technology companies have contributed to the depth of the Chinese knowledge base.
Oh, yes.
Wouldn't a lot of people would like to know that?
Yeah. You're the expert. I figured I'd ask you.
No. What do you do? Do you allow Chinese students to work at American universities to help develop the science? Yep. Or do you view all of them as spies? And there was a recent incident, of course, where there were in fact Chinese spies operating under the auspices of the US. So it's a difficult area, and I think a lot of people would like to know how to balance that.
Yeah, I was more looking at the aspect of the Facebooks and the Googles and those kind of companies and the data that they have residing in China that the Chinese have access to.
Yeah. Well, China forbids any export of data from China with any of those applications. It keeps that within China. Mm-hmm. But outside of China, China is looking to get as much data as it can.
Right.
And this incident with TikTok just illustrated how important that is. But it's going on all the time. And Zimbabwe exchanged all its data for face recognition software, so it could control its population. So different countries have different put different value on the data, but China puts the top level data. It realizes that data is the oil of the 21st century, and it wants to have as much data and have dominance in data compared to any other country in the world.
Makes sense.
Duncan, you had a question?
In this whole discussion of the US versus China in this race, a concern I have, and I don't know if you have any insight into this, is that probably within our government, there is no single agency that has this as their focus. I'm guessing it's scattered across multiple departments, and there is no, I'll use the term AI czar. Am I wrong or am I correct?
I think, as far as I can see, you're correct. That this country has never believed in planning. You know, in the 70s, remember,
Come on.
because politicians are there for 2 or 6 years, they don't really think about the future. And it's up to people like Tom Friedman to actually lay down some policy and some thought in this area. But I remember in the 70s, everybody thought Japan was going to be the technology leader because its government had set a plan, a 10-year plan, to be the dominant force in technology. What happened to that? It turns out that the American system of letting talent, allow 1,000 blooms to blossom and letting people develop innovation, support it with venture capital, that works. The market decides which technologies have merit. It's not the government. And so there is this argument about whether how much you could plan and how much you let the natural system evolve. Because after all, who are the tech leaders in the world? You got America, China catching up rapidly. The question is, though, that usually the problem with a centrally planned economy is they don't know how to allocate resources. The market is the expert at that, according to Adam Smith. But now you have AI-assisted decision-making. So can AI determine, in fact, what are the best approaches to pursue in a centrally planned economy? That's the question. China is betting that it can. But America is going to have to rely, again, on its ingenuity and on the culture of grabbing that brass ring and that propelling innovation, and we'll see what happens.
Paulette Kine, you had an observation in terms of medical, but also perhaps in how you manage some of this. You need to unmute.
First of all, Morris, this was a tremendous and very provocative presentation. I thank you very much for it. My question, I suppose, is we're already seeing medical advances via AI. How are these going to mesh with the whole history and process of peer review, potential advances in knowledge or new procedures?
With peer review?
The peer review, you publish it, you put it out there, and everybody has a chance to look at it, comment on it, try to duplicate it. You see changes in that process to some new form of review?
No, I think it would still be the case of experts reviewing work by other experts. But I don't know if that's going to speed or slow the development of AI. I imagine that it would just help to speed it, because then you'd be pursuing paths that were relevant rather than fake. You know, with this whole issue of fusion, remember the scam there with fusion, cold fusion. So I think without peer review, you could end up going down a lot of rabbit holes. So I think peer review is still necessary so that everybody is pursuing fields that are productive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Is that it, Bill?
Yes, no.
For the, have you got
No,
some
no,
more?
there's a question there. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I have a question. Unless I missed it, is there another aspect that you need to compare the results of AI versus the results of human? Because you can have accidents and deaths and ill will and everything on either side. So like with Tesla as an example, how many accidents took place with it and how many would have taken place without it, the self-driving? Or the drones. Recently, there was a whole, thing about drones killing innocent people, I think in Afghanistan. And that's with humans. So don't we need to compare one to the other to see the efficaciousness of AI? And is it really so scary given human error?
Yeah. Well, people are scared about when they see people dying in self-driving cars. It may be only one incident, but nonetheless, it's scary. The question of if you do have self-driving cars, how safe will they be? They're projected to be very safe. We don't know yet, but that's the idea. But yeah, you do have to overcome that human element of taking one example and basing everything on that one example. So one death in a test over 3 or 4 years, you could say that's understandable, but nonetheless, there is that death, and that's going to affect people's attitude towards the technology.
Okay.
I think there will always be that element to it. But there are a lot of issues to be resolved. And my fear is that who's going to do it? How are you going to strike a balance between protecting people's rights and still allowing enough innovation to become a leader and remain a leader in the field? And that's going to be a difficult issue. With the Chinese, it's no issue at all. They have no restraints. But in the Western world, we have. And in having those restraints, are we going to leave the field open for China to set the standards and be the leader in this important area? And that's the question that is difficult to resolve.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can I speak? I wanted to make a couple of comments. I noticed the many smiley faces when we talked about the business of planning. There are a lot of cross-cultural studies to indicate that in Western society and in US in particular, we as a population, about 75% of the people have a very near-term, short-term, very concrete approach to anticipating and understanding what is of concern or what's real or whatever. In Asian countries, there tends to be a much longer view of what's important and how to deal with it. So we have a very short-term perspective, and as a culture, I think a short-term perspective often driven primarily in the pursuit of profit. And I'm not so sure that either the short-term view or the complete reliance on profitability bodes well for how we manage the growth of AI and technology advance in general going forward. My concern is with the world of work. And I have not been overly convinced ever, and my field has been career and life planning. I have never been convinced that there's compelling evidence over the long term that AI and technology advance will create more jobs than it eliminates. Over the long term, I just can't get my head around the fact that it will create more jobs. Different jobs, yes, and in some areas, more jobs. But over the long term, in general, I would suspect that many more jobs will be eliminated than are created. That said, what do we do? There was a book not some years back now called The End of Work, and I'm trying to remember the
author, but I can't at the moment. I've got it on my shelf someplace. But I think we're going to well see as this whole thing moves forward, the end of work as we know it today in very large sections of our economy, not just in blue collar jobs, but in white collar as well. So I just would say, let us think collectively as communities and society about what we do to create work and to sustain the population, because as Morris alluded earlier, and thank you so much, Morris, for your presentation, the end result could be utter chaos if there is not opportunity for gainful employment and livable wages. So I just think the implications for the world of work are profound.
They are. We already have 10 million jobs unfilled because people aren't trained for them. And AI, of course, is going to require more education, more training. And the question is, can we do that? And it's all going to happen in a short period of time. We're talking about 2030 for job losses in climate change potentially and through AI. And how are you going to train all these people who used to do one job to become proficient in AI? And if you don't, what kind of society will you have? Will you have people in the streets? And so it is a big problem. The education and training and the technology companies are starting to realize this and working with universities to make their students more proficient in areas that are needed. Now, you could say, well, what's wrong with liberal education? But nonetheless, as a practical matter, there's going to have to be a lot of training and education to meet the needs of AI systems within 10 years. And I don't know if anybody's focusing on that and what the answer is, but it is potentially a dangerous issue. So you've got the wealth inequality and you've got the job dislocation. Together, those two could be a major issue for society going forward.
Indeed.
You know, I look at Facebook and these other social media companies and how they've transformed our world, in my mind, for the worse. But imagine that on steroids.
Well, I think with that, we should move on. But Morris, geez, once again, I echo some of the comments you've already heard. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And thanks again for your effort. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Good.
And it is a little scary, but I'm gonna, oh boy. It's really an eye opener. I've learned a lot. Thanks a lot. I'd like to call quickly and briefly on Bill Helm to tell us about our next month's presentation and who's going to be doing what.
Thank you, Joe. And perhaps this is going to be an appropriate segue. Next month, Professor Fred Folks, who's a professor of management and organization at Boston University and also heads is the faculty director of their Human Resource Policy Institute, is going to be joining us to talk about current practices and emerging trends in human resource management. So this could go right into the whole set of issues we're talking about here about what's being done to train and get the workforce ready. So I think we should all look forward to seeing Fred here next month. He's a part-time resident of New London when he's not in Boston teaching. So on February 10th will be our next meeting with Professor Fred Folks.
Yes, and I've been advised that he's interested in joining the organization as well. So we look forward to. I'm certainly looking forward to that.
Perhaps we could waive his membership fee and not give him a cup, and then be a member.
Everything's open to negotiations here. Okay, there's just a couple final things. We do have a couple openings that we need to fill, and I'd really look for some volunteers. One is we need to have another membership to assist Mark Friedman. For example, he is going to be gone the next 2 months, and if we decide to meet in person, we will need someone to fill in his shoes, which he's done a great job. And, you know, as a backup, it's a very easy job and it's a great way to meet people. So I would encourage people to contact me directly or Mark. Otherwise, you'll be getting some sort of a phone call. But it's always better if we can get some volunteers, and it's a nice way to meet more people. Also, we will need to be looking for a secretary since Bill is going to be moving into the slot of the taking over from Morris and Art Rosen, who have done a fantastic job these last couple of years in lining up speakers. And again, kudos to them, but we'll need a secretary slot. So think about that. Also, I'd appreciate it if folks would come forward if they'd like to volunteer for giving the words of wisdom. So far, I've been able to call people and they've been very responsive, and I appreciate that. But it's always nice if there's people who would like to maybe be willing to step up and do that. So I'd appreciate if you consider that, and you can contact me directly. You've got my email address. And if not, you can get it through John Bellis. So, and I'll just, before I close, Paul, I don't know, we've kind of run over a little bit here. Is there any thoughts you might like to share on where your views? Paul, in case of the new folks that don't know, is our resident epidemiologist, and I've turned to him quite often for advice in the past. So would you like to, I don't know.
Thank you, Joe. No, I just had to unmute myself.
Okay.
I don't think I have anything dramatically new to say to you, but I do have some thoughts. We've all probably heard of the projections from numerous sources that Omicron, with its high transmissibility, will probably burn through the US. And we can expect and are seeing large numbers of cases, and it will probably occur in a relatively short period of time. The current thinking is that this wave will probably end sometime, maybe as soon as sometime in February. I would say, however, the prospect of many new cases, higher cases than ever before, I would ask that you not be dismayed. All of this effort to vaccinate, mask, distance, etc., has not been in vain. I think what we need to do is begin asking ourselves, what do we expect or what do we want from our vaccines? If we want to prevent cases, then very frankly, the vaccines have not been wildly successful. If we want to prevent serious illness, hospitalizations and deaths, and their associated large social costs, I think our vaccines have been remarkably successful. Our hospitalizations and our deaths are overwhelmingly among the unvaccinated. And that is just the incontrovertible truth of what's going on today. So I think that, again, just thoughts, some unclear, some clearer. We're coming closer and closer to a profound decision on how we choose to measure and therefore how we choose to plan our next steps. As long as we have large portions of people in the population who remain unvaccinated, we're going to continue to see high social costs and going to continue to see serious illnesses and deaths. And that may motivate us to continue our current set of perceived very disruptive responses. I think we have to start thinking about where to go next. And I'm sure Bill is thinking very carefully about this. I know he's thinking carefully about this in terms of what we do here at Eastman. But I think societally, we have to decide what it is how we're going to measure this. And maybe with a different set of measurements, maybe we'll be a little more comfortable, as eventually we will be with the COVID and this virus.
Thank you, Paul. As
I
always,
have
oh, go ahead, someone else.
I have just a quickie for Morris. Is there easy place to go and find the information that you've just gone over for a while that I could spend more time looking and reading about?
About
Mark?
AI?
Yes.
Well, I haven't read the book, but there's a new book that's out with the former head of Google, who's written a book on AI. So
Okay.
that's the latest book. I can't remember the title of it,
It's okay.
but
It was
Yeah.
so interesting what you had to say. I'd like to get deeper in it. I just haven't given it a hell of a lot of thought.
yeah. Well, if you go on Amazon, it uses artificial intelligence to decide what books you'd like to read. But you go on there and put in artificial intelligence, you'll see a whole list of them.
Yes, thanks.
Oh, ask Siri.
Yeah, and thanks again. And just as a reminder, these meetings, you will be able to, they are recorded. All of our Zoom meetings from last year were recorded. And we did send out a notice. You can go back and visit them at any time and share them with people and friends. I happen to be doing that with some folks I know, and they are very interested in hearing about these. I'm glad we do have this opportunity, and thanks again for your participation. And unless there's any other comments or any other new business, I would say we can bring this to a close. So be it.
Morris, thanks, Joe.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Joe.